My name is Emily, and for a long time I believed I had the perfect life. I met my husband David when I was 26 years old. We both worked in Chicago, and we met during a charity event organized by our companies. He was funny, kind, confident, and unlike anyone I had ever dated. We spent hours talking that first evening, and before I went home, he asked for my phone number. 3 years later, he proposed to me on the same rooftop where we had our first date. I said yes without hesitation because I truly believed I had found the man I would spend the rest of my life with. Our wedding day was beautiful, the weather was perfect, our families smiled for every picture, and everyone kept telling us how lucky we were. I remember standing beside David while his mother, Linda, hugged me tightly. She smiled, looked directly into my eyes, and whispered, "Welcome to the family. Just remember, no woman will ever love my son as much as I do." Everyone laughed after she said it because they thought she was joking. I laughed too. Looking back now, I wish I had paid more attention to the look on her face. She wasn't joking at all. At first, Linda seemed like a caring mother. She called every few days to ask how we were doing. She baked pies and brought them over on Sundays. She always complimented my cooking, although somehow she always found a reason to explain how she would have done it differently. If I made chicken, she would say it needed more seasoning. If I baked cookies, she would tell David that hers were softer. None of it seemed important. I thought she was simply proud of her experience. About 2 months after our honeymoon, I came home from work and found Linda inside our house. I froze. She was standing in our kitchen, reorganizing my cabinets. "Oh," she said with a smile, "you're home early." I looked at David. "How did your mom get in?" He answered casually. "I gave her a spare key." I stared at him. "You what?" He shrugged. "It's just for emergencies." I looked around the kitchen. Nothing looked the way I had left it that morning. Linda smiled. "I thought I'd surprise you." I forced a smile back. "Thank you." Inside, something felt wrong. Over the next few weeks, Linda started appearing more often. Sometimes she would stop by while I was working from home. Other times she would let herself in while we were at work and leave dinner in the oven. At first, David thought it was sweet. "She's just trying to help," he kept saying. But it didn't feel like help. It felt like someone slowly taking over my home. One Saturday morning, I woke up and couldn't find my favorite coffee mugs. I searched every cabinet. Nothing. Finally, I asked Linda, who happened to be visiting again. "Oh," she said casually, "those old things? I threw them away." I stared at her. "You threw them away?" "They were chipped." "They weren't chipped. They would have chipped eventually." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "They were a wedding gift from my sister," Linda shrugged. "I bought you better ones." I looked at David, expecting him to say something. Instead, he sighed. "Emily, they're just mugs." No, they weren't just mugs. They were my belongings, and someone had thrown them away without asking. That night, I told David I wasn't comfortable with his mother having a key. He looked genuinely surprised. "Why?" "Because she walks into our house whenever she wants. She's family." "So am I." He was quiet for a moment. "I think you're overreacting." That was the first time those words left his mouth. They wouldn't be the last. Months passed, and little things kept happening. I would buy groceries on Monday. By Wednesday, half of them would be gone. Linda would explain that she thought they had expired. I would decorate the living room. She would rearrange everything. If I bought new curtains, she'd replace them with different ones. If I planted flowers, she'd pull them out because she preferred another color. Every time I complained, David defended her. "She means well. She's old-fashioned. Don't make this into a big deal." But it became a big deal because it wasn't just about furniture anymore. It was about respect. One evening I came home exhausted after a long day at school. I wanted nothing more than to take a shower and relax. Instead, I found Linda sitting on my couch watching television. She didn't even look surprised to see me. "I let myself in," she said. "I can see that." She muted the TV. "You look tired." "I am." "You've been working too much." "I enjoy my job." She smiled. "When you have children, you'll quit." I laughed politely. "We haven't decided if we want kids yet." Her smile disappeared. "You don't have a choice." I blinked. "What?" "A wife gives her husband children." I felt uncomfortable. "That's between David and me." She stood up. "No, dear, marriage is between two families." That sentence stayed with me for days. Later that week, I asked David again to take back the spare key. He looked annoyed. "Why are you obsessed with this?" "Because your mother doesn't knock." "She's my mother. And this is our home." He rubbed his forehead. "I don't want to argue." Neither did I. But somehow every conversation ended the same way. A few months later, things became stranger. One Friday afternoon, I couldn't find my engagement ring. I always left it beside the bathroom sink before showering. It was gone. I searched everywhere, every drawer, every cabinet, nothing. I panicked. David came home and helped me search. Linda arrived 20 minutes later after David called her. She looked more upset than either of us. "Oh my goodness," she gasped. "Someone must have stolen it." I frowned. "No one comes into our house." She looked around dramatically. Well, unless. She stopped speaking. Unless what? David asked. Linda hesitated. I don't want to accuse anyone. Mom, she sighed. I noticed the cleaning lady looking around the bedroom last week. I immediately shook my head. No, Linda folded her arms. People can surprise you. Our cleaning lady had worked for us for over 3 years. She had never stolen anything. David looked uncertain. We should ask her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think she stole my ring? We don't know. Linda nodded slowly. It would explain everything. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't right. The next morning, our cleaning lady came to the house. She looked terrified. She kept insisting she hadn't taken anything. She even emptied her purse in front of us. Nothing. I believed her. Linda didn't. After she left, Linda whispered to David, Guilty people always cry. I watched my husband silently consider her words. That hurt more than I expected. 3 days later, I found my engagement ring. It was inside an old jewelry box in the guest bedroom, a jewelry box I'd never used. I walked downstairs holding the ring. David! He looked relieved. You found it? Yes. Linda smiled. Well, isn't that wonderful? I looked directly at her. How did it end up in the guest room? She shrugged. You probably forgot. I've never opened that jewelry box. She laughed softly. Memory gets worse as we get older. I was only 32. I knew exactly where I had left my ring, but David hugged me, happy the ring was back, and the conversation ended. I couldn't prove anything. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had moved it. About 6 months later, David started acting differently. He became distant. He stopped laughing as much. He spent more weekends helping his mother with random projects. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, he always answered the same way. I'm just stressed. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. David was standing there with his phone. The moment he saw me, he locked the screen. That wasn't like him. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah. Who are you texting? My mom. He smiled, but something about it felt forced. Later that night, while David was asleep, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't trying to spy. I only looked because I thought it might be an emergency. The preview on the screen said, I don't think she's telling you the truth. It was from Linda. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, David barely looked at me during breakfast. For the first time since we were married, I felt like there was someone else living between us. And that someone wasn't another woman. It was his mother. For weeks, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. I told myself every marriage goes through difficult seasons. I told myself David was simply stressed from work. I even apologized to him for bringing up his mother's behavior so often because I was afraid I was becoming the kind of wife who complained about everything. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, something kept changing between us. David stopped sharing little details about his day. He stopped asking about mine. He started spending more evenings at his mother's house, helping her with projects that somehow never seemed to end. One weekend he was fixing a fence. The next weekend he was repainting her guest bedroom. Then he was reorganizing her garage. Every time I suggested we spend time together, he already had plans with Linda. One Friday night I surprised him by making his favorite dinner. I lit candles, bought a nice bottle of wine, and even wore the blue dress he once told me was his favorite. He walked into the house, looked at the table, and sighed. I'm sorry. For what? I promised Mom I'd help her tonight. I stared at him. You already promised me we'd have dinner together. I forgot. You forgot our date, but remembered your mother? He looked irritated. Emily, don't make me choose. I wasn't asking him to choose. I was asking him to remember that he had a wife. He left 20 minutes later. I ate dinner alone. The candles burned all the way down before I finally cleaned the table. That night, he didn't get home until almost midnight. He smelled like fresh paint. I wanted to ask why painting a bedroom took 6 hours. Instead, I rolled over and pretended to be asleep. A few days later, something happened that made my stomach drop. I stopped by Linda's house after work because David had forgotten his laptop at home. He wasn't answering his phone, so I thought I'd save him the drive. I knocked on the front door. No answer. I knew they were inside because David's truck was parked in the driveway. The door wasn't completely closed. I pushed it open. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard Linda's voice coming from the kitchen. She's controlling you. I froze. David answered quietly. She's not controlling me. Then why don't you spend as much time with me anymore? Mom, I raised you by myself after your father died. I know. I sacrificed everything. I know. And now she wants to take you away. I stood perfectly still. Linda continued, she doesn't appreciate this family. David didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any words. I quietly backed out of the house before either of them saw me. I drove home with tears running down my face. When David arrived 2 hours later, he kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. I almost told him I had heard everything. Instead, I smiled weakly and asked if he wanted dinner. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. Things only became worse. One Sunday afternoon, my younger sister Sarah came over to visit. We spent hours talking in the backyard. When she left, she hugged me tightly. You okay? Yeah, you don't look okay. I laughed. I'm just tired. She looked toward the house. Is it David? I hesitated. It's complicated. She squeezed my hand. You know you can tell me. For the first time, I admitted everything. The constant visits, the criticism, the spare key, the conversations, the way David always defended his mother. Sarah listened quietly. When I finished, she asked one question. Has anything ever gone missing besides your ring? I thought for a moment. My grandmother's necklace. My passport disappeared for 2 days. My tax documents. My favorite sweater. She nodded slowly. And who usually finds them? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. It was almost always Linda. I had never noticed the pattern before. That realization made my skin crawl. Sarah looked at me seriously. I think your mother-in-law is doing this on purpose. I wanted to disagree. Instead, I realized she was probably right. The following week, I decided to test something. I placed $50 inside an envelope in my desk drawer. I told no one, not even David. 3 days later, the money was gone. I searched every drawer. Nothing. That evening, Linda stopped by unexpectedly. While she was making coffee, I casually asked David if he had seen the envelope. He looked confused. What envelope? The one with $50. No. Linda suddenly spoke. Oh, I saw an envelope on the kitchen counter yesterday. I looked at her. It wasn't on the kitchen counter. She blinked. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. I hadn't mentioned where the envelope had been. How did she know it existed? That night I barely slept. The next morning I drove to an electronics store before work. I bought 2 tiny security cameras. I didn't tell anyone. After work, while David was helping his mother replace some light fixtures, I installed one camera facing my office. The other pointed toward the hallway leading to our bedroom. They were almost impossible to notice. I felt guilty. Then I reminded myself that I was installing cameras inside my own house because I no longer trusted the people walking through it. That guilt disappeared. For almost 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was teaching. Motion detected. I couldn't watch immediately. The rest of the day felt endless. As soon as I got home, I opened the recording. My heart started racing. The front door opened. Linda walked inside. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She simply let herself in. She walked directly toward my office. She looked around carefully. Then she opened every drawer in my desk, every single one. She picked up my notebook, read several pages, opened my mail, looked through my tax records. Then she smiled. She reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, placed it inside my desk, closed the drawer, and walked away. I couldn't breathe. I replayed the video 5 times. I knew exactly what that meant. Someone wasn't stealing from me. Someone was planting things inside my house. When David came home that evening, I almost showed him immediately. But then another thought crossed my mind. If I confronted him too early, Linda would simply come up with another excuse. I needed to know what she had placed in my desk. After he went to sleep, I quietly walked downstairs. I opened the drawer. There was a white envelope I had never seen before. Inside were photographs. Photographs of a man and a woman kissing in a parking lot. The woman had dark hair. She was about my height. From a distance, she looked almost like me. Almost. Until I looked closer. It wasn't me. It was someone else. Along with the pictures was a handwritten note. I thought you deserved to know the truth about your wife. I felt cold all over. Linda was creating evidence, fake evidence. Evidence meant for David to discover. If I hadn't installed those cameras, he probably would have found the envelope himself and believed every word. I sat on the living room floor holding those photographs until nearly 3 a.m. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't passive aggression anymore. This wasn't an overprotective mother. This was a woman trying to destroy my marriage, and suddenly every strange thing from the past 3 years made perfect sense. Instead, I realized she was probably right. The following week, I decided to test something. I placed $50 inside an envelope in my desk drawer. I told no one, not even David. 3 days later, the money was gone. I searched every drawer. Nothing. That evening, Linda stopped by unexpectedly. While she was making coffee, I casually asked David if he had seen the envelope. He looked confused. What envelope? The one with $50. No. Linda suddenly spoke. Oh, I saw an envelope on the kitchen counter yesterday. I looked at her. It wasn't on the kitchen counter. She blinked. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. I hadn't mentioned where the envelope had been. How did she know it existed? That night I barely slept. The next morning I drove to an electronics store before work. I bought 2 tiny security cameras. I didn't tell anyone. After work, while David was helping his mother replace some light fixtures, I installed one camera facing my office. The other pointed toward the hallway leading to our bedroom. They were almost impossible to notice. I felt guilty. Then I reminded myself that I was installing cameras inside my own house because I no longer trusted the people walking through it. That guilt disappeared. For almost 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was teaching, motion detected. I couldn't watch immediately. The rest of the day felt endless. As soon as I got home, I opened the recording. My heart started racing. The front door opened. Linda walked inside. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She simply let herself in. She walked directly toward my office. She looked around carefully. Then she opened every drawer in my desk, every single one. She picked up my notebook, read several pages, opened my mail, looked through my tax records. Then she smiled. She reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, placed it inside my desk, closed the drawer, and walked away. I couldn't breathe. I replayed the video 5 times. I knew exactly what that meant. Someone wasn't stealing from me. Someone was planting things inside my house. When David came home that evening, I almost showed him immediately, but then another thought crossed my mind. If I confronted him too early, Linda would simply come up with another excuse. I needed to know what she had placed in my desk. After he went to sleep, I quietly walked downstairs. I opened the drawer. There was a white envelope I had never seen before. Inside were photographs. Photographs of a man and a woman kissing in a parking lot. The woman had dark hair. She was about my height. From a distance, she looked almost like me. Almost, until I looked closer. It wasn't me. It was someone else. Along with the pictures was a handwritten note. I thought you deserved to know the truth about your wife. I felt cold all over. Linda was creating evidence. Fake evidence. Evidence meant for David to discover. If I hadn't installed those cameras, he probably would have found the envelope himself and believed every word. I sat on the living room floor holding those photographs until nearly 3 a.m. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't passive aggression anymore. This wasn't an overprotective mother. This was a woman trying to destroy my marriage. And suddenly every strange thing from the past 3 years made perfect sense. I wanted to wake David up that very second. I wanted to drag him downstairs, play the security footage, throw the fake photographs on the table, and ask him how he could possibly believe his mother after seeing something like that. But another part of me stopped. If Linda had spent years manipulating him, one video probably wouldn't erase all of it. She would cry. She would deny everything. She would somehow turn herself into the victim. I needed more than one piece of evidence, so I put the envelope back exactly where I had found it. The next morning, I acted like everything was normal. I kissed David goodbye before work. I smiled when Linda called during dinner. I even thanked her when she brought over a homemade casserole. Inside, though, I had become someone else. I watched, I listened, and I waited. 3 days later, another motion alert appeared on my phone. This time I opened the live feed immediately. Linda was inside our bedroom. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't organizing. She was opening my nightstand drawer, then my jewelry box, then my closet. She carefully removed one of my dresses from the hanger. She sprayed perfume on it. A man's cologne, not David's. She smiled to herself. Then she placed the dress back exactly where it had been. I stared at my phone in disbelief. "What are you doing?" I whispered. When I got home that evening, David was already there. He was standing in our bedroom, holding that exact dress. He looked confused. "Emily." "What?" "Why does this smell like men's cologne?" There it was, exactly as she had planned. I forced myself to stay calm. "I have no idea." He held the dress closer. "This isn't mine." "I know." He looked uncomfortable. "Maybe someone sprayed it at work?" I shrugged. "I guess." He nodded slowly, but I could see it. A tiny seed of doubt had been planted, exactly what Linda wanted. What? That night, after David fell asleep, I watched the security footage again. I copied every recording onto 2 separate hard drives. Then I uploaded everything to cloud storage. If something happened to my computer, I wasn't losing that evidence. Over the next month, I discovered just how calculated Linda really was. She never stayed longer than 15 minutes when David wasn't home. She always wore gloves. She never touched anything she didn't need to. Sometimes she simply walked through the house looking around. Other times she moved small objects by only a few inches. A picture frame, a watch, my purse. Tiny changes designed to make me question my own memory. One afternoon, she walked into my office carrying a stack of unopened bills. She quietly hid one of them behind a bookshelf. 2 weeks later, when the electricity company sent us a late payment notice, David looked frustrated. "I thought you handled the bills." "I did." "No, you didn't." "I never got this one." He held up the unopened envelope. "It was behind the bookshelf." "I didn't put it there." He sighed. "You've been forgetting a lot lately." My heart sank. Those were Linda's exact words from months earlier. Memory gets worse as we get older. She wasn't just moving objects. She was trying to convince David that I couldn't remember anything. She wanted him to think I was losing my mind. One Saturday morning, Sarah came over again. This time I showed her the videos. She watched silently. When the last recording ended, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Emily, I know. This is terrifying. I know. You have to show David." "I will, but not yet." She frowned. "What are you waiting for?" I'm waiting for something he can't explain away. She nodded reluctantly. I just don't want you waiting too long. Neither did I, but I knew Linda. One video could become a misunderstanding. Two videos could become she was trying to help. I needed enough evidence that even David couldn't deny it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It was David's birthday. Linda insisted on hosting dinner at her house. Nearly 20 family members were there. His cousins, his aunt and uncle, his grandmother, everyone. Dinner was pleasant at first. People laughed. Children played in the backyard. Then Linda stood up holding a wine glass. I'd like to make a toast. Everyone became quiet. To my wonderful son, David smiled. Linda continued, I've always wanted nothing more than for you to be happy. She looked directly at me. I only hope the people around you deserve your kindness. The room became awkwardly silent. I smiled politely. Thank you, Linda. She smiled back. Oh, Emily, I wasn't talking about you specifically. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. David quickly changed the subject. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, Did you hear what your mother said? He kept his eyes on the road. She didn't mean anything. David. She was nervous. No. He gripped the steering wheel harder. Can we please stop talking about my mother for one day? I looked out the window. For the first time in our marriage, Mom, I wondered if we were going to survive this. A week later, another strange thing happened. David came home looking angry. What happened? I asked. He tossed his phone onto the kitchen counter. I got an anonymous email. My stomach tightened. What kind of email? He unlocked the screen. Someone had sent him several photographs. They showed me sitting in a coffee shop with a man. The subject line read, Your wife has been lying to you. I looked closer. The man in the pictures was Michael, a fellow teacher. We had been discussing lesson plans. The photographs had been taken from outside the cafe with a zoom lens. Every image was carefully cropped. You couldn't see the stacks of school papers on the table. You couldn't see the other teacher sitting nearby. It looked like a secret date. I slowly looked up. Do you believe this? David hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore. Those words hit me harder than I expected. You think I'm cheating? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He rubbed his face. I'm just confused. Who sent these? I don't know. I almost laughed. I knew exactly who had sent them, but instead I asked calmly, Did your mother know about this email? He looked surprised. No. Are you sure? Emily, I'm asking. He looked away. I mentioned it. When? This afternoon. And what did she say? He hesitated again. She said she hoped it wasn't true. Of course she did. That evening I checked the cameras. No surprise. Earlier that afternoon, while I was still at work, Linda had entered our office. She sat down at David's computer. She plugged a flash drive into the USB port. She spent almost 10 minutes typing. Then she removed the flash drive and left. I zoomed in as much as possible. I couldn't read the screen, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she had been doing. She had sent the anonymous email herself. Now I had proof that she had accessed David's computer. Another piece of the puzzle, another lie, another attempt to tear us apart. I was beginning to understand something that frightened me more than anything else. Linda wasn't acting out of jealousy anymore. She wasn't simply overprotective. She needed to be the most important person in David's life. And if destroying our marriage was the only way to make that happen, she wasn't going to stop until she succeeded. Nearly 20 family members were there, his cousins, his aunt and uncle, his grandmother, everyone. Dinner was pleasant at first. People laughed, children played in the backyard. Then Linda stood up holding a wine glass. I'd like to make a toast. Everyone became quiet. To my wonderful son. David smiled. Linda continued, I've always wanted nothing more than for you to be happy. She looked directly at me. I only hope the people around you deserve your kindness. The room became awkwardly silent. I smiled politely. Thank you, Linda. She smiled back. Oh, Emily, I wasn't talking about you specifically. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. David quickly changed the subject. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, Did you hear what your mother said? He kept his eyes on the road. She didn't mean anything. David, she was nervous. No. He gripped the steering wheel harder. Can we please stop talking about my mother for one day? I looked out the window. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered if we were going to survive this. A week later, another strange thing happened. David came home looking angry. What happened? I asked. He tossed his phone onto the kitchen counter. I got an anonymous email. My stomach tightened. What kind of email? He unlocked the screen. Someone had sent him several photographs. They showed me sitting in a coffee shop with a man. The subject line read, Your wife has been lying to you. I looked closer. The man in the pictures was Michael, a fellow teacher. We had been discussing lesson plans. The photographs had been taken from outside the cafe with a zoom lens. Every image was carefully cropped. You couldn't see the stacks of school papers on the table. You couldn't see the other teachers sitting nearby. It looked like a secret date. I slowly looked up. Do you believe this? David hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore. Those words hit me harder than I expected. You think I'm cheating? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He rubbed his face. I'm just confused. Who sent these? I don't know. I almost laughed. I knew exactly who had sent them. Exactly. But instead I asked calmly, did your mother know about this email? He looked surprised. No. Are you sure? Emily. I'm asking. He looked away. I mentioned it. When? This afternoon. And what did she say? He hesitated again. She said she hoped it wasn't true. Of course she did. That evening I checked the cameras. No surprise. Earlier that afternoon, while I was still at work, Linda had entered our office. She sat down at David's computer. She plugged a flash drive into the USB port. She spent almost 10 minutes typing. Then she removed the flash drive and left. I zoomed in as much as possible. I couldn't read the screen, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she had been doing. She had sent the anonymous email herself. Now I had proof that she had accessed David's computer. Another piece of the puzzle, another lie, another attempt to tear us apart. I was beginning to understand something that frightened me more than anything else. Linda wasn't acting out of jealousy anymore. She wasn't simply overprotective. She needed to be the most important person in David's life, and if destroying our marriage was the only way to make that happen, she wasn't going to stop until she succeeded. For the next few days, I barely spoke to Linda. If she came over, I stayed polite but distant. If she complimented my cooking, I simply said, thank you. If she criticized something in the house, I ignored it completely. That seemed to bother her more than arguing ever had. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to lose my temper. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. One evening, while David was taking a shower, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it, not because I wanted to invade his privacy, because the name on the screen caught my attention. Mom. The message read, did you ask her where she was last Thursday? I felt my chest tighten. A second message appeared. People who lie always make mistakes. I put the phone down immediately. When David walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, I asked calmly, what happened last Thursday? He looked surprised. What do you mean? You've asked me twice where I was. He looked uncomfortable. I was just wondering. No. I folded my arms. You were investigating me. He sighed. Emily. No, tell me the truth. He looked away. My mom thought your story about staying late at school sounded strange. I laughed, not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So your mother is keeping track of my schedule now? She was only worried. Worried? She doesn't want me getting hurt. And what about me? Silence. That silence answered every question I had. The following Saturday, I decided to do something I had never done before. I followed Linda. She left her house around 10 in the morning. Instead of driving to the grocery store like she usually claimed, she parked outside a small cafe downtown. A few minutes later, another woman joined her. They hugged. Then they sat near the window. I parked across the street. I couldn't hear them, but I could see enough. Linda took several photographs out of her purse, the same photographs from the fake affair. The woman laughed. Then she handed Linda an envelope. Linda counted money before putting it inside her handbag. My stomach dropped. Whoever that woman was, she wasn't a friend. She was helping Linda. I quickly took several pictures with my phone. When Linda finally left, I stayed behind. I walked into the cafe. The waitress smiled. Table for one? Actually, I pointed toward the booth Linda had been sitting in. The woman who just left. Is she here often? The waitress nodded. Every couple of weeks. Does she usually meet the same person? Yeah. She smiled. I think they're sisters. No, I smiled politely. They're not. The waitress shrugged. Well, they're always talking about somebody. I thanked her and left. Now I knew Linda had someone helping her. I just didn't know who. 2 weeks later, I got my answer. I came home early because one of my classes had been canceled. As I walked toward the front door, I heard voices inside. The house was supposed to be empty. I unlocked the door quietly. Linda was in the living room. So was the woman from the cafe. Neither of them noticed me. The stranger laughed. I still can't believe he fell for those pictures. Linda smiled proudly. I told you he'd believe anything if I sounded concerned. The woman shook her head. You're terrible. Linda laughed. No. She took a sip of coffee. I'm protecting my son. The woman lowered her voice. Oh, what if he finds out? He won't. Linda smiled confidently. He never questions me. I stood frozen in the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my purse. The stranger asked another question. What happens if they have kids? Linda's smile disappeared instantly. They won't. And if they do? Linda looked completely serious. Then I'll make sure she leaves before that happens. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't about me anymore. She had already planned years into the future. She wasn't reacting to our marriage. She had declared war on it the day it began. I quietly stepped back outside before either of them saw me. Then I waited in my car until they left. That evening, I downloaded the newest camera footage. As expected, Linda had entered my office again. But this time, she made a mistake. She received a phone call while searching through my desk. She answered without realizing the camera recorded sound. "I've got them," she whispered. A man's voice answered through the speaker. "Good. I'll leave everything where he'll find it. You'll get the rest of the money after he files for divorce." Money. I replayed the recording 3 times. Money. Someone was paying Linda. This wasn't only about obsession anymore. There was another reason, another person, another motive. I listened to the recording over and over, trying to recognize the man's voice. Then suddenly, it hit me. I had heard that voice before, not often, only during family gatherings. David's cousin, Mark. Mark worked for a private investigation company. Mark had professional cameras. Mark knew how to follow people without being noticed. Mark could have taken every single fake surveillance photograph. I immediately searched through old family pictures. There he was, standing beside Linda at nearly every holiday dinner, always smiling, always quiet, always watching. The next day I decided to test my theory. I called Mark. "Hi, Emily. I was wondering if you could recommend a private investigator." There was a brief pause. "What for?" "I think someone has been following me." Another pause. "Really?" "Yeah. I don't know anyone." It was an obvious lie. Private investigation was literally his profession. As soon as we hung up, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. "Mark is involved." The pieces were finally starting to fit together. Linda wasn't acting alone. She had help. She had someone who knew how to create believable evidence, someone who knew how to stalk people, someone who knew exactly how to destroy a marriage without ever touching it directly. For the first time since all of this began, I stopped feeling scared. I started feeling angry because I realized something Linda had never considered. She thought I was going to spend the rest of my life defending myself. She had no idea. I was about to go on the offensive. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in nearly 4 years. I wasn't actually sick. I just knew this was the day everything had to change. David left for work around 8. As usual, he kissed me goodbye before walking out the door. There was still kindness in that kiss. That was the hardest part. I knew he wasn't a bad man. He was simply a man who had spent his entire life believing one person could never lie to him. Unfortunately, that person was his mother. As soon as his truck disappeared around the corner, I drove to the electronics store again. This time I bought 4 more cameras. By noon, every entrance to the house was covered. The living room, the garage, the kitchen, even the hallway leading to David's office. If Linda stepped inside again, there wouldn't be a single blind spot. Around 1 o'clock, my phone buzzed, motion detected. I opened the live feed immediately. Linda. She walked in carrying a grocery bag. She smiled as if she owned the place. Instead of heading toward the kitchen, she walked directly into David's office. She closed the door behind her. 5 minutes later, she came back out. The grocery bag looked flatter than before. She'd left something inside. Then she casually placed milk and bread into the refrigerator, making it look like she'd only stopped by to help. Before leaving, she walked through the living room and straightened the picture frames. Then she smiled at one of our wedding photos. "I'll fix this soon," she whispered. My blood ran cold. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was talking to herself. That evening, I waited until David fell asleep. Then I quietly walked into his office. I searched every drawer. Nothing. Then I remembered the grocery bag. I checked the kitchen trash. It was still there. Hidden beneath some paper towels was a small black flash drive. I stared at it. I hadn't seen Linda remove anything from her purse. She had hidden it inside the grocery bag before arriving. I carried it upstairs. My laptop recognized it immediately. There were dozens of folders. Most were empty. One wasn't. Inside were hundreds of photographs. Photographs of me, leaving school, getting coffee, shopping, walking my dog, getting gas. Some were taken from across the street. Others were taken through restaurant windows. Several had dates written underneath them. Every movement I had made for almost a year had been documented. I felt physically sick. Then I opened another folder. It was labeled Evidence. Inside were edited photographs. Some had been cropped. Others had been manipulated. In one image, I appeared to be holding hands with a man. The original photo showed me helping an elderly customer cross an icy parking lot. The man's wife had been walking just outside the frame. She had been removed. Another picture made it look as though I was entering a hotel with Michael from work. The original image had been taken outside a conference center after a teacher's seminar. Half the people standing nearby had been cropped out. Every picture had been designed to tell one story, that I was cheating. I opened another folder, audio. There were recordings, phone calls, conversations. Most had been edited. Entire sentences had been cut apart and rearranged. Someone had spent dozens of hours manufacturing an affair that had never existed. Then I found something else, a spreadsheet. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the columns: photo session, editing, printing, travel, payment. Beside each expense a name, Linda Collins, and below it, payments to Mark. Some were $500, others were over $2,000. The total was almost $30,000. $30,000. Someone had spent $30,000 trying to convince my husband I was unfaithful. But where had Linda gotten that kind of money? She had retired years ago. Her pension barely covered her bills. Something wasn't adding up. I copied every file onto my laptop, then onto another hard drive, then onto cloud storage. By the time I finished, it was almost 3 a.m. I barely slept. The next afternoon, I received another surprise. My phone rang during lunch. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" a woman's voice answered. Is this Emily?" "Yes." "My name is Karen. I think we need to talk." "I don't believe we know each other." "We don't." There was a long pause. "But I know Linda." Every muscle in my body tensed. "What about her?" Karen sighed. "I used to work with her." I stayed silent. "I've been trying to decide whether I should call you." "Why?" "Because I think she's dangerous." I looked around the empty teacher's lounge. "Can we meet?" "Today." 2 hours later, we sat in a quiet diner on the edge of town. Karen looked nervous. She was probably in her late 60s. She stirred her coffee for almost a full minute before speaking. "I worked with Linda for nearly 20 years. I nodded. "She wasn't like everyone thinks." "What do you mean?" Karen looked me straight in the eyes. "She becomes obsessed." I felt a chill. "Obsessed?" "With people." She nodded slowly. "If someone gets too close to the person she loves, she can't handle it." I swallowed. "Has she done this before?" Karen looked down at her coffee. "There was another woman." My heart started pounding. "What woman?" "David's fiancée." I frowned. "David told me he'd never been engaged." Karen looked surprised. "He doesn't know." "What?" Karen took a deep breath. "When David was 24, he dated a nurse named Melissa." My mind raced. "They were together almost 3 years." "Why did they break up?" Karen looked at me sadly. "They didn't." I leaned forward. "What happened?" "Melissa disappeared." I blinked. "What do you mean she disappeared?" "One day she packed her things and left. That's what David believes." Karen slowly shook her head. "I don't think she left on her own." The diner suddenly felt very quiet. Karen opened her purse. She slid an old photograph across the table. A smiling young woman stood beside David. He looked genuinely happy. I had never seen this picture before. Karen pointed toward Linda, who stood just behind them. "She hated Melissa." I whispered, "How do you know?" Karen didn't hesitate. "Because she told me." I stared at her. "What exactly did she say?" Karen's face became serious. "She said, 'No woman is going to take my son away from me.'" The exact same sentence, just different words. The exact same obsession, the exact same pattern. Karen reached into her purse again. This time she handed me a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local nurse relocates after sudden engagement canceled." The article claimed Melissa had accepted a job in another state. Karen shook her head. "That story wasn't true." "How do you know?" "Because I helped her pack." I looked up. "So she really did leave?" Karen nodded. "But only because Linda convinced her that David had been cheating on her." I closed my eyes. Of course, the same plan, the same lies, the same fake evidence. Linda had done it before. I wasn't the first woman she had tried to erase from David's life. I was simply the first one who had cameras. I couldn't stop thinking about Melissa. For years, I believed I was fighting a battle that had started the day I married David. Now I realized I had stepped into a war that had begun long before I ever met him. Karen reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "Melissa blamed herself for years." "Does she know what really happened?" Karen nodded. "Eventually." "Where is she now?" "Seattle." "Do you still talk to her?" "Every Christmas." I hesitated. "Do you think she'd talk to me?" Karen looked at me for a long moment before smiling. "I think she's been waiting for someone to ask." That evening, I couldn't focus on anything else. David noticed. "You've barely said a word." "I'm tired." "You've been tired a lot lately." I almost laughed. Of course I had. I'd spent the last few months discovering that my mother-in-law had turned my marriage into a carefully planned psychological game. "I'm fine," I said quietly. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Neither of us slept well that night. The next afternoon, Karen texted me an address in Seattle along with a phone number. My hands were shaking as I dialed it. A woman answered after the third ring. "Hello? Melissa?" "Yes." "My name is Emily." There was silence. "I'm David's wife." Another silence. Then she whispered, I wondered when I'd hear from you." Her voice wasn't surprised. It sounded sad. We talked for nearly 2 hours. By the end of the conversation, I felt like someone had taken the last 7 years of my life and held them up beside hers. The similarities were almost impossible to believe. "It started small," Melissa said. "Like what?" "She'd show up unannounced." I closed my eyes. "So did mine." "She criticized everything I cooked." "Mine too." "She'd move things around our apartment." I gripped the phone tighter. "Mine does that." Melissa sighed. "I started thinking I was going crazy." I whispered. "So did I." Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. "One day David accused me of cheating." I didn't say anything. "He had photographs." My heart sank. "Pictures?" "Pictures of me having dinner with another man." "What really happened?" "My brother had flown in from Denver." I stopped breathing. "What?" "We hadn't seen each other in almost a year." I felt sick. "The photographs were cropped." "Exactly like mine." Melissa continued. "David believed his mother." I closed my eyes. "I begged him to trust me." "What did Linda say?" Melissa gave a bitter laugh. "She kept saying she didn't want to interfere." I recognized that line immediately. Linda always pretended to stay out of our marriage while secretly controlling every part of it. "I left because I couldn't fight both of them anymore," Melissa said quietly. "You never cheated." "No." "You never lied." "No." "You just left." I loved David enough to know he would never choose me over his mother. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she asked, "Is she doing the same thing to you?" "Yes." "I'm sorry." Those 2 words almost made me cry, not because they solved anything, because they were the first words of genuine understanding I'd heard in years. Before hanging up, Melissa surprised me. "I still have everything." "What do you mean?" "The emails, the fake letters, the anonymous photographs. I kept every single one." I sat up straighter. "You did?" "I never knew why." She laughed softly. "I guess I was waiting for someone to believe me." 2 days later, a large envelope arrived at my house. Inside were dozens of documents, copies of anonymous letters, photographs, printed emails, even handwritten notes. Every single one looked hauntingly familiar. The wording was almost identical to the messages David had received about me. Only the names had changed. Instead of Emily, it said Melissa. Instead of Michael, it named another innocent man. Different people, same lies, same strategy, same handwriting. I placed Melissa's documents beside mine on the dining room table. The similarities were undeniable. Linda hadn't simply repeated the pattern, she had perfected it. As I continued looking through the envelope, one folded sheet of paper slipped onto the floor. It was an old greeting card. Inside, Melissa had written only one sentence. "If she realizes you're collecting evidence, she'll become desperate." I read it 3 times, desperate. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one watching. Linda had been studying me too. That realization was confirmed the very next morning. I walked out to my car to drive to work. One of my tires was completely flat. At first, I assumed I'd run over a nail. Then I noticed something shiny beside the tire. A small razor blade. My heart started pounding. I crouched down. The sidewall had been sliced cleanly, not punctured, cut. Someone had done it intentionally. I immediately checked the security camera facing the driveway. At 2:17 that morning, a hooded figure walked toward my car. The face wasn't visible, but the person's height, the way they walked, even the purse hanging from one shoulder, I knew exactly who it was, Linda. She looked directly toward the camera for a split second, almost as if she knew it was there. Then she smiled. Not a warm smile, not a nervous smile, a smile that said, "I know you're watching." For the first time since installing the cameras, I felt genuine fear. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. It had become a game between us, and Linda had just let me know she understood the rules. That afternoon, while waiting for the tire to be replaced, I received another text. It was from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, just 6 words. "Stop digging while you still can." I stared at the screen. A minute later, another message arrived. "Some marriages aren't worth saving." I didn't answer. Instead, I took screenshots. Then I smiled to myself. Because whoever had sent those messages had made a mistake. Threats leave records. Records become evidence. And evidence was exactly what I had been collecting. By the time I got home that evening, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Linda alone. I wasn't going to argue with David. And I wasn't going to hand over a folder full of videos and hope he believed me. No. If Linda had spent years creating a performance, then I was going to give her one final stage, a stage with every member of the family watching, and this time there would be nowhere left for her to hide. For the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. Every morning I kissed my husband goodbye. Every afternoon I checked my cameras. Every evening I organized evidence. I created folders, videos, photos, emails, phone records, bank transactions, screenshots. By the end of the second week, I had over 300 files. Everything was backed up in 3 different places. If my laptop disappeared, I still had copies. If my phone broke, I still had copies. I wasn't taking any chances. Then something happened that I never expected. David apologized. It was a quiet Sunday morning. We were drinking coffee on the back porch when he looked at me and said, "I miss us." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He stared into his mug. "I feel like we're living in the same house but different worlds." I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to show him every recording. Instead, I asked, "Do you know why that happened?" He nodded slowly. "I guess we've both been stressed." No. We hadn't both been stressed. One person had spent years poisoning our marriage, but I couldn't say that yet. Not until everything was ready. "I've been thinking," David continued. "About what?" "Maybe we should take a vacation." I smiled sadly. "I'd like that." "So would I." For just a few seconds, it felt like I had my husband back. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. "Mom." Without hesitation, he answered. I quietly stood up and walked inside. That tiny moment reminded me why I couldn't let my guard down. Linda still had access to him whenever she wanted. Later that afternoon, another notification appeared on my phone. Motion detected. I opened the camera feed. Linda. Again. This time she wasn't searching through drawers. She was standing in our bedroom looking at our wedding picture. She picked up the frame, ran her finger across the glass, then whispered, "Not much longer." I watched in complete silence. She carefully placed the picture face down on the dresser before walking away. It felt symbolic, like she had already decided our marriage was over. That evening I called Melissa. "I think she's getting more aggressive." Melissa didn't sound surprised. "She always does." "What do you mean?" "When she feels like she's losing." I frowned. "Did she threaten you?" "No." "What did she do?" Melissa hesitated. "She tried to make me look unstable." My heart skipped. "How?" "She called my boss pretending to be concerned." "What?" "She said I was depressed." I felt sick. "Did your boss believe her?" "At first," Melissa sighed. "Then someone reported that I was drinking during work. I already knew the answer." "You weren't." "No." "Who reported you?" "I never found out." Silence filled the call. Then we both said the same name at exactly the same time. "Linda." Melissa laughed bitterly. "She doesn't attack directly. She attacks your reputation." Exactly. That was the word I'd been searching for. Reputation. She didn't need people to hate you. She only needed them to doubt you. 1 doubt became 2. 2 became 10. Eventually, people stopped asking questions. They simply believed her version. The next morning, my principal asked if we could talk. As soon as I sat down, I knew something was wrong. He folded his hands. "I received an anonymous complaint." My stomach tightened. "What kind of complaint?" He looked uncomfortable. "It says you've been behaving inappropriately with another teacher." There it was. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because Melissa had predicted it perfectly. My principal continued, "I don't believe anonymous accusations." "Thank you. But I have to ask." "I understand." I calmly explained that Michael and I had worked together on curriculum planning. Nothing more. He nodded. "I figured." Then he surprised me. He slid a printed photograph across the desk. It was another edited picture, the same style, the same cropping, the same manipulation. I looked up. "Can I keep this?" He smiled. "Sure." As I walked back to my classroom, I realized Linda had become reckless. She wasn't only trying to destroy my marriage anymore, she was trying to destroy my career. That afternoon, I called an attorney, not because I wanted to sue anyone immediately, because I wanted to know my options. After listening to my story for nearly an hour, the attorney leaned back in his chair. "Do you still have every recording?" "Yes." "Every email?" "Yes." "Every text message?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good. What do you think?" He smiled slightly. "I think your mother-in-law has made one very expensive mistake." "What mistake?" "She documented a pattern." He pointed toward one of the folders. "This isn't one incident. No. This is years of harassment." He tapped the table. "And juries understand patterns." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. 3 days later, I finalized my plan. I called every member of David's immediate family, his aunt, his uncle, his grandmother, his cousins, even Mark. I told them I wanted to organize a surprise family dinner for David because work had been stressful lately. Everyone agreed, including Linda. She sounded delighted. "Oh, Emily," she said sweetly, "that's such a thoughtful idea. I thought it would mean a lot to David." "It will." "I'll cook." She laughed. "Let me help." "No," I replied politely. "I've got everything covered." She paused for just a second, then said, "If you're sure." She had no idea. The dinner wasn't for David. It was for her. The entire week leading up to it, I barely slept. I checked every file over and over again. I organized the videos into chronological order. The first unannounced visit, the missing ring, the planted envelope, the fake photographs, the flash drive, the recordings, the anonymous emails, the tire, everything. Even Melissa agreed to help. She couldn't come in person. But she recorded a video statement describing everything Linda had done to her years earlier. Karen did the same. So did my sister Sarah. By Friday night, I had enough evidence to fill an entire courtroom. There was only one question left. Would David finally be willing to look at it? Or had Linda spent so many years controlling the narrative that even the truth wouldn't be enough? The morning of the dinner felt strangely peaceful. I woke up before sunrise and sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. The house was completely silent. David was still asleep upstairs, and for a few minutes I let myself remember what life had been like before all of this. I remembered our first apartment, when we couldn't afford matching furniture. I remembered dancing barefoot in the living room while eating takeout because we didn't even own a dining table yet. I remembered how he used to hold my hand every time we crossed the street, even when no cars were coming. I missed that man. I wasn't sure if he still existed. By noon, the food was ready. I arranged everything exactly the way David liked it. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, grilled vegetables, apple pie. Anyone walking into the house would have thought it was simply another family gathering, only I knew it was the end of something. Around 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Linda was the first to arrive. She walked in carrying a bouquet of flowers and smiled as if she had never caused a single problem in anyone's life. "Emily," she said warmly, "everything smells wonderful." "Thank you." She hugged me. For the first time, I didn't hug her back. She noticed. Her smile faded for just a fraction of a second before returning. One by one, the rest of the family arrived. David's aunt, his uncle, his grandmother, Mark, several cousins, Sarah, Karen. When Linda saw Karen standing near the front door, her expression changed instantly. Just for a second, but I saw it. Confusion, then concern. Then she walked over. "Karen." "Linda, it's been a long time." "It has." Neither woman smiled. Linda looked around the room. "I didn't know you were invited." Karen answered calmly. "Emily thought I should be here." Linda slowly turned toward me. I smiled politely. "I did." For the first time that evening, she looked nervous. Dinner was surprisingly normal. People laughed. They shared old family stories. David seemed happier than he had been in months. Every few minutes I caught Linda looking at me. She knew something was different. She just didn't know what. When everyone finished eating, I stood up. "I actually have something I'd like to say." The room became quiet. David smiled. "Is this another surprise?" "In a way." I picked up the television remote from the coffee table. "I've spent the last 7 years trying to become part of this family." Everyone listened quietly. "I've made mistakes." I looked at David. "So have you." Then I looked at Linda. "And some mistakes were intentional." The room became very still. Linda laughed softly. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "I think you do." I pressed the remote. The television turned on. The first video appeared. It showed Linda unlocking our front door with her key. She walked inside while no one was home. Nobody spoke. The second clip started. Linda opened my desk drawers. She searched through my personal documents. David frowned. "Mom," Linda quickly answered, "I was looking for insurance papers." I didn't say anything. I simply pressed play again. The next video showed her taking the envelope of fake affair photographs from her purse and placing it inside my desk. No one moved. No one even breathed. Linda's face turned white. She looked toward David. "I can explain." I pressed play again. The room filled with the recording of her whispering into her phone. "I've got them," a man's voice answered. "You'll get the rest of the money after he files for divorce." Every head in the room slowly turned toward Mark. He immediately stood up. "I don't know what that is." I calmly picked up another remote. The screen changed. Now it displayed copies of bank transfers, payments from Linda to Mark, dates, amounts, descriptions. His face lost all color. David looked back and forth between them. "What is this?" Neither of them answered. I played another clip. This one showed Linda spraying a strange man's cologne onto my dress. David stared at the screen in disbelief. "No!" Another clip. Linda hiding the electricity bill. Another. Moving my engagement ring. Another. Reading my private journal. Another. Whispering to herself while looking at our wedding picture. Not much longer. The room was completely silent except for the television. David slowly sat down on the couch. He looked like he couldn't breathe. Finally, Linda spoke. "This isn't what it looks like." I looked directly at her. "Really?" She nodded quickly. "Emily edited these." I had expected that. Without saying a word, I connected my laptop to the television. A folder opened, original video files, creation dates, security camera timestamps, cloud backup records, everything. Impossible to fake. Linda looked around the room. Nobody was looking at me anymore. Everyone was looking at her. She tried again. I only wanted to protect my son. Karen stood up. You said the same thing about Melissa. Linda froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then another face appeared on the television. Melissa. She looked directly into the camera. My name is Melissa Hayes. I dated David for almost 3 years. Linda convinced him I was cheating using fake photographs, anonymous letters, and lies. I left because I realized I would never win against someone willing to destroy another person's life. David stared at the screen. His lips trembled. No, Melissa continued. I don't blame David anymore. I blame the person who taught him that trusting his wife was a betrayal of his mother. The video ended. David looked at Linda. Tell me she's lying. Linda opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He asked again. Tell me. She shook her head slowly. I did it because I love you. The room erupted. His aunt covered her mouth. His grandmother began crying. One of the cousins whispered, Oh my God! Mark quietly started backing toward the front door. Sarah noticed first. He's leaving. Before anyone could react, Mark ran. David's uncle chased after him. The front door slammed. Inside the house, nobody moved. David kept staring at his mother. How long? She swallowed. How long? Her voice cracked. Since Melissa. He closed his eyes. So everything? She nodded weakly. The pictures? She nodded again. The emails? Another nod. The ring? She looked down. The anonymous messages? Tears rolled down her face. Yes. David looked like a man whose entire life had just collapsed. He whispered, I trusted you. Linda reached toward him. I did it for us. He stepped backward. No. She reached again. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice became louder. You destroyed the woman I loved. She started crying harder. I was afraid of losing you. He looked at her with tears in his own eyes. And because of you, he turned toward me. You did. The room was silent. David walked across the living room until he stood in front of me. His eyes were red. I am so sorry. I believed him. Every word, every tear, every ounce of regret. But belief wasn't enough anymore. He reached for my hand. I gently stepped back. The pain on his face was immediate. Emily, I know you didn't do what she did. He nodded desperately, but every time I asked you to trust me, I felt tears running down my own face. You chose someone else? He couldn't argue, because it was true. For 7 years, he had chosen her, over and over again. I love you, he whispered. I know. And I love you. Those words surprised everyone in the room, even him. I took a deep breath. But love without trust doesn't survive. He closed his eyes. I'll fix this. I shook my head slowly. No. He looked broken. I already spent 7 years trying to save our marriage. I picked up my purse. I won't spend another 7 trying to convince you that I deserved your trust. I walked toward the front door. Nobody tried to stop me. Just before stepping outside, I turned around one last time. David was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. Linda was crying alone, for the first time in her life. No one was comforting her. I quietly said, I hope one day you both find peace. Then I opened the door and walked away. David didn't call me that night. He didn't call the next morning either. Part of me expected him to. Another part knew he probably couldn't even find the words. I checked into a small hotel on the other side of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. For the first time in years, I slept without wondering if someone would let themselves into my home while I was gone. The silence felt unfamiliar. It also felt safe. Around noon the next day, my phone started vibrating. Missed call. David. Then another. Then another. By evening, there were 16 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Please talk to me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please come home. I read every message. I answered none of them. The following morning, my lawyer called. Emily? Yes. I wanted to let you know someone already contacted my office. Who? Your husband. I closed my eyes. He wants to cooperate. With what? Everything. That surprised me. What does that mean? He gave us permission to obtain copies of his financial records, emails, and phone logs. I sat down on the edge of the bed. He did? Immediately. For the first time since leaving the house, I believe David finally understood how badly he had failed me. 3 days later, the police contacted me, not because of Linda, because of Mark. He had disappeared after the family dinner. No one had heard from him. Apparently disappearing only made him look more guilty. The investigators asked if I would share the files from the flash drive. I agreed. Every recording, every bank transfer, every edited photograph, every threatening message, everything. As I handed over the hard drive, one detective looked at me and said, "This is one of the most organized harassment cases I've ever seen." I wasn't sure whether that made me feel proud or sad, probably both. A week later, Karen called. "They arrested Mark." I nearly dropped my coffee. "What?" "He tried deleting evidence from one of his computers." "What happened?" "The police got there first." For the first time in months, I smiled, not because someone had been arrested, because the truth couldn't be buried anymore. 2 weeks after the dinner, I finally agreed to meet David. We chose a quiet park where we used to walk every Sunday morning. When I arrived, he was already sitting on a bench. I barely recognized him. He had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked exhausted. When he saw me, he stood immediately. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. Neither of us knew what to say. Finally, he spoke. "I watched every video." "I know." "I watched them 3 times. I stayed silent. I kept hoping I'd find some explanation. There wasn't one. "No." He looked down at the ground. There wasn't. Several children ran past us laughing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then David quietly said, "I changed the locks." I looked at him. I removed my mom from every emergency contact." Another pause. "I blocked her number." I nodded slowly. "She keeps writing letters." "I know. I don't read them." He took a deep breath. "I started therapy." That surprised me. "My therapist asked me something." "What?" "He asked me when I first learned that disappointing my mother meant I was a bad son." I looked at him. I couldn't answer. He smiled sadly. Then I realized. He swallowed hard. "I've spent my entire life trying to make sure she never felt abandoned. And in the process," he looked directly into my eyes, "I abandoned you." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." "I know. I don't expect forgiveness." "I know. I just needed you to hear me say it." I believed him. More than I ever had before, because this apology wasn't asking for anything. It wasn't asking me to come back. It wasn't asking me to pretend nothing had happened. It was simply accepting responsibility. We talked for almost 2 hours. For the first time in years, there were no lies sitting between us. As we stood to leave, David asked quietly, "Can I ask you one question?" "Okay. If this had happened differently." He hesitated. "If I had believed you the first time." I felt tears forming again. "Would we still be together?" That question stayed in the air for what felt like forever. Finally, I answered honestly, "Probably." He closed his eyes. "I thought so." He nodded once. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Then we walked in opposite directions. Neither of us looked back. 3 months later, I officially filed for divorce. David didn't fight it. He signed every document the same day. He didn't ask for the house. He didn't ask for my retirement savings. He didn't ask for anything. His lawyer sent one short message. "David wants this process to be as painless as possible for Emily." Reading that sentence almost broke me, because it was exactly the kind man I had fallen in love with. He had always been there. He had simply spent too many years trapped in someone else's control. 6 months later, the criminal case finally reached court. Mark accepted a plea agreement after investigators recovered thousands of edited photographs and fabricated documents from his office computers. He admitted Linda had hired him to follow me. He admitted she paid him to edit photographs. He admitted they created anonymous emails together. When asked why he helped her, he answered with one sentence, "I thought it was just a divorce." Even the judge looked disgusted. Linda refused every plea deal. She insisted she had done nothing wrong. During the trial, she testified for nearly 4 hours. She claimed she only wanted to protect her son. Then the prosecutor played the recording. "I'll fix this soon." The one where she stood in front of our wedding photograph, then another. "Not much longer, then another. You'll get the rest of the money after he files for divorce." The courtroom became silent. For the first time, Linda had nowhere to hide. No family members, no excuses, no one willing to believe another lie. After the hearing ended, I walked outside into the afternoon sunshine. Reporters were waiting near the courthouse. One of them asked, "Do you hate your former mother-in-law?" I thought about the question. Then I answered honestly, "No." They looked surprised. "I don't hate her." "What do you feel?" I smiled sadly. "I feel sorry for anyone who loves someone so much that they're willing to destroy them." Because that was the truth. Linda thought she was protecting her son. Instead, she lost him. A year has passed since then. I bought a small house with a porch and a garden. I planted roses myself. No one pulls them out. No one rearranges my furniture. No one lets themselves in without knocking. Sometimes I still think about David. I hope therapy helped him. I hope he found peace. I hope one day he learns that love isn't measured by obedience. A few months ago, I received one final letter. The handwriting on the envelope belonged to David. Inside was only a single page. It read, "You were right the first time you asked me to trust you. I wish I had listened. I can't change the past, but I promise I'll never ignore the truth again. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. I hope your life is filled with the peace I failed to give you. You'll always have my gratitude and a part of my heart." There was no return address, no request to meet, no phone number, just goodbye. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and walked outside to water my roses. For years, I thought the hardest part of my story would be exposing the lies. It wasn't. The hardest part was accepting that sometimes the people we love aren't the villains in our lives. Sometimes they're simply too afraid to stand up to the real one. And sometimes loving yourself means walking away from the person you hoped would choose you, because they never learned how. That was the day I finally understood something that changed my life forever. Peace doesn't begin when the lies end. It begins the moment you stop begging someone to believe the truth.